Hi, welcome to a new episode of Engineering Rebuilt.
Do you think you know a lot about construction?
Maybe we can provide a fresh perspective.
This is a podcast where we rebuild preconceptions of engineering,
Reclaim the narrative,
and share the voices of women from across the construction industry. Why not join us?
Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Engineering Rebuilt podcast. I'm your host Yvonne Raleigh, and today with Tina Gunnarsson we are joined by the amazing Susan Francombe. We're going to talk to her about her career and the amazing things that she's got up to. So why don't you introduce yourself, Susan?
Thank you very much. Well, I suppose if somebody asks me what I do, I generally describe myself as a biking building barrister, because I'm lucky enough to have worked in the construction industry for over 30 years. I'm a chartered civil engineer and a lawyer, and I'm also a keen motorcyclist that's helped found a women's motorcycle club. So in a nutshell, that's me. So you asked me how I got into construction, and I'll be perfectly honest in that it wasn't something that had ever crossed my mind until I went to university. My school was really good. The girls did woodwork, metalwork, the boys played netball. They were quite good at sort of making sure that everyone had a go at everything. But when it came to careers advice, engineering didn't exist. We'd never heard of it. You were either a builder or an architect, and that was the total sum of it. So I went to university. I'd been studying sort of maths and sciences because I found that interesting. And I actually went to do, it was a mathematics degree. And now, which was a big mistake. I mean, apologies to any mathematicians out there, but I just found it so boring. And somebody that I was sharing a house with happened to be doing a civil engineering course. And I was just reading more of their books than I was of mine. And they'd be coming back and saying, oh, we've been out surveying today. I've just designed a roof truss for a building. I've just done this. I've just mixed concrete. And I just think, wow, that's really interesting. So at the end of the first year, I just thought this isn't for me. And I was lucky in that they took me back on to start afresh as a civil engineer, which was brilliant. And really didn't look back from there because I just fascinated with construction and design and the whole process. So that's how I got into it, really by mistake. And obviously, once I was graduated, I managed to get onto a graduate training scheme with a civil engineering company, which is great. And as part of that, I obviously worked on site and the design office on some really great projects. And I mean, I'm just trying to think some of my favourite ones. I think my favourite design project was designing a camel bridge for the Middle East. And I think there's only a few of us that can say we have designed a bridge for camels. And essentially, they were putting a new road through the desert that happened to go through the grazing grounds for one of the sheikh's herd of camels. And obviously, you might have heard of Badger underpasses in Brighton, which is great, which are just small pipes. But camels, unfortunately, don't go through small pipes. So we actually had to design and build a huge underpass just for the camels. But that's, as I say, that was one of my favourite things to design because it was just so bizarre. And also, I got asked lots of unusual questions, one of which was the client worrying about the effect of camel urine on the concrete. So that was an unusual question, and I actually found out that somebody had done a research paper on urine on concrete. So yeah, construction's amazing. There's always something that new that you can learn from it. And in fact, although I'm more involved in disputes now, I'm still involved with the Institution of Civil Engineers. So I'm on a number of committees with them, including overseeing the law and contract management exams that they run. So encouraging engineers in particular to get more qualifications and learn more about how to manage projects. And I'm also involved with the dispute resolution panel board as well, overseeing the panel of adjudicators and arbitrators. So that was my sort of construction side of things. Now, when I was working on site, one of the things that happened was some of the jobs ended up with disputes. I hasten to say that that wasn't my fault. It wasn't, linked to anything that I'd done, but they did end up with disputes. And obviously we then have claims consultants coming along, and there's nothing more that makes you think more about what you've done and how you've worked in the past than somebody coming up to you and saying, oh, by the way, I hope you've still got your site diaries. We might need them in evidence. That sort of thing makes you think, oops, hang on a minute. Makes you really think about what you've done. I was just interested in what they were doing, because they were coming along and saying, well, because of X, Y, and Z clause in the contract, then this happens and they're entitled to whatever. And I just thought, I want to know a bit more about this. And I found out that you could do a part-time law course. So, in fact, while I was working on building part of the Jubilee Line extension, at the weekends I was going to law school to learn the basics and learn your sort of basic law qualifications. And again, I know it sounds a bit geeky, but I really loved it because it was really interesting. We covered all sorts of things, not just contract law. We did criminal law as well. Really, and it's just fascinating world and a view into the world of the legal system. And once that was finished, I can remember going to them and saying, really enjoyed the course, thanks very much, And then, of course, obviously, pound signs probably went into their eyes. And they went, oh, by the way, there's something else you can study now. And I'm like, what's that? And they said, well, we do the bar exams as well. And I just thought, oh, that sounds interesting. So I did the bar exams, again, with no plan to become a lawyer. I've got no lawyers in the family. I went to my local comprehensive school. At the time, I think there was less of a system in place to encourage people from sort of non-traditional backgrounds and without legal connections into the profession. So I had none of that in mind, but I just generally interested in learning how barristers put their arguments together, how the system works. And so I did that. And when I passed and I got called to the bar, I can remember seeing a job advert for a city law firm, and they were looking particularly for people with experience of construction and construction disputes and working on site and projects and things like that. And it didn't occur to me that, oh yeah, you've got to be a qualified lawyer and I've done that. I just thought, well, that sounds the sort of thing I'm really interested in. And I applied, and much to my surprise, I got taken in for an interview and I got given a job. So I ended up working for 2 years at a city law firm, which was really great grounding, really taught me a lot about how they operate. But in my heart of hearts, I knew that was not for me. The world of suits was not going to be my career path. I really wanted to get back and work in-house. So that's what I did. And I ended up working for various companies, consultants, an insurance company and architects and various other people, and working on their contracts and disputes. And then I finally ended up working for Lang O'Rourke for 10 years as in-house counsel there. So I was dealing there with sorting out contracts for various huge multi-million pound schemes for hospitals and schools and things like that, and also handling some of their disputes. So I was involved with a large number of adjudications in particular, and occasional arbitration and helping out on litigation. So, I mean, that was really interesting. And I think for me, until then, I'd already always worked for consultants or clients. To then work for a contractor was really interesting. And I what really surprised me, and it shouldn't have done, but I suppose it's part of this, the we're better than you sort of attitude that you tend to get between clients and consultants and contractors. But what really surprised me was the passion and pride that the project teams had in their work, and how upset they got when somebody brought a claim. It was like, no, we did this job, we did it really well. And they, they'd come to me and they'd be like, well, come on. And they'd want to tell me what they'd done and try and explain what had happened. And they really went out of their way to just try and say, look, even put their hands up if things were wrong, because they were so proud of the work that they'd carried out. And that for me was really good thing to see, because I think there is still this sort of thought in some places that perhaps builders and contractors are always looking to cut things and perhaps not to do them as well as they can. And I was really pleased that was something that I didn't see at all. And that was good for me. And so ever since then, I've been working as an independent consultant, and I'm now doing that. I'm also an arbitrator and adjudicator. So I like to think I'm a sort of judge rinder for building contracts, apart from the fact I can't dance. So, but I mean, overall, I really have a passion for building and construction. It's been a great industry. There's some marvellous people involved with it, and there are fantastic opportunities for careers.
Susan, that's an absolutely incredible overview of your career, of your interests. I've got so many questions. We're going to be here all day. Goodness, the effect of camel urine on concrete.
Well, actually, with that one, there was I found a paper written by someone on that, and the reason he started to write the paper was he was an American professor, and what he found was in some of the large construction pools in America, the people on site, because they were quite high up in formwork and construction, obviously they weren't going downstairs to go to the toilet in the right places, and were peeing in the concrete, to put it bluntly. And so questions have been asked about the effect of that. So he'd done research on that, and the conclusion was it makes absolutely no difference. So I managed to convince the client that the camels are okay. You didn't have to worry too much about it.
I'm glad we've clarified that. So you've told us about your favorite projects from an engineering point of view, but I would love to hear about what your most interesting cases have been.
A lot of things I can't talk about. There was one case that I think really frustrated me, and that was one where I was representing a party, and I basically spent a year of my life in an arbitration on this particular project. And you know what it's like when lawyers, if you're ever in a dispute, you know, both lawyers will say that their clients are entirely right and there's no real dispute and the other side is completely wrong. Well, in this case, we believe that because we couldn't see what the other side were on about. We really couldn't see the value of their claim. And it just made no sense to us. And we just couldn't work it out. And we were trying to sit down with the other side. We had a without prejudice discussion where we literally said to them, look, you know, we're not trying it on here. We can't see it. And the frustrating thing was that the person from the other side said, yes, I agree with you. And there were business reasons why they wanted to bring this case. And it ran for a year. It cost both companies millions of pounds. And it was all done because of business decisions rather than a genuine feeling that this was a dispute that should be followed. So as I say, I can't really go into details, but something like that I found really frustrating because in a way it was wasting my time, it's wasting their time, it's wasting the arbitrator's time, although of course they made lots of money out of it. But it's things like that that really frustrate me. I prefer things to be about justice and fairness and getting the right result rather than politics and power and which unfortunately comes into things in too many ways.
I was going to say, I mean, I've been in the industry 30 years now, probably not similar to you, and it's that I think we've all worked on jobs where you look back and you go, okay, right, it's going nowhere but to the courts or to arbitration, and there are those genuine jobs where it goes wrong from day one because of whatever decision, and you think, well, actually, if you tendered it differently, if you changed things, I find that frustrating from a delivery perspective because you can see how it would have worked much better if you'd done it a different way. I imagine from your perspective, Susan, that's equally frustrating.
Oh, it can be. And I mean, there are ways of trying to prevent that. I know at the moment there's a lot of talk about conflict avoidance panels and things like that to try and prevent things moving to that extreme end of disputes. And also even things like the ECC contracts, which are designed that you flag up a problem and a dispute at the beginning rather than leaving it all to the end. And obviously, if a contract's run properly under those conditions, things are dealt with as they go along, and that can prevent a bigger argument later on. But again, not always are they run in that way. And it needs people that are willing to spend time and money and effort up front And unfortunately, I think that's a problem, particularly at the moment with increased costs and staffing issues and things like that. Trying to persuade someone that they need to spend a bit of money up front to set things up properly is really hard, because they don't see that. If they've got a choice of having this nice shiny product on the walls or something a bit cheaper and save X amount, they can make that decision. But saying to someone, or spending money up front, thinking more about how you procure things, how you arrange things with the contractor, and if you work together in this way, it might make things less likely to end in a dispute. You try quantifying that. It's a bit like, I always equate it to buying insurance. Everyone hates paying for insurance until something goes wrong and you need them to pay out, and then you're like, whoa, hang on. And that, to me, that's part of the problem. The whole idea of setting up a contract and dare I say it, spending money on lawyers at the front, it's not very attractive. But when you think of the potential costs and time saving later, there you are. But again, as I say, it's like insurance. Nobody likes paying out at front. You like to pay for things that you can see. You like paying for your concrete. You like paying for your steelwork. You like paying because they're physical and you can feel, I've got a value. It's very difficult to get to say to someone at the end of a project, oh, well, if you hadn't done X, Y, and Z, it would have cost you 10 million. You can't show that. It's not a physical thing. And that's the problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm going to jump in. You mentioned at the beginning motorbikes. Come on, I need to know more about this. As a motorbiking engineer, I need to understand what you've been doing.
Well, I've got a passion for motorbike. I do really enjoy riding motorbikes, and it probably won't mean anything to a lot of the listeners, but if there are any bikers out there, I have an MV Agusta Dragster 800 RR.
Oh, okay. Now I have bike envy. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, which is it's a very small, very light, very fast, and I think very pretty Italian bike. And I'm at the age now where if I go out, men don't look at me, but they certainly look at my motorbike. So it is an eye turner, and I really enjoy it. I admit when I first learned to ride a long time ago, and I stopped riding when I had a car accident because I just sort of thought, oh no, roads are dangerous. But I got back into it about 12 years ago now. And at first I was really scared and nervous, but gradually what I've done is ride with more experienced riders, take extra training. And now I've been on track days, so I've been on Cadwell and various other racetracks, Brands Hatch on the bike. And it's just absolutely brilliant. I really enjoy it. And one of the things that I enjoy as well is the camaraderie. It's a bit like engineering. We talk about having the crack in engineering. Well, you have something similar in biking. It doesn't matter how old you are, what you ride, what your sex is, what you look like. If you turn up at a bike meet on a bike, people come and talk to you, and people that you would never go near in real, but they just come and talk, and it's brilliant. And they also talk to you about your bike. It's not just, oh, you're a woman, is your bike pretty? They'll come and say, well, what's your BHP? What's this? It's great. It's a real leveler being a biker. And I actually helped found a women's bike club called Evolution Women's Motorcycle Club. So that just because we enjoyed going out for rides and just enjoying the scenery, having a day out, it's just great. It just takes you away from everything.
Yeah, I loved riding. I stopped when my daughter was diagnosed with her disability because I balanced the need of her versus the need of me to have speed and excitement and all of those things. But I used to ride to Fawley. I was working in Fawley Refinery at the time, and there'd be a long queue of traffic. The road into Fawley is single carriageway, and everybody's going into the refinery at the same time of day. And I go out down the outside on my Triumph Daytona in my race leathers, going nicely down the outside. And then you pull into the gate, and they wouldn't even look at who was under the helmet because the leathers were distinctive, the helmet was distinctive, the bike was distinctive. They wave you through. And a journey that was taking my male colleagues in their Beetle cars a couple of hours was taking me 35 minutes. And it's like, yeah, this is a lot of fun. And then at the weekends, all of us that were bikers were going out in the New Forest and riding around, and it's a great way to spend time. It's a great leveler. As you said, nobody cares what gender you are, what you look like. it's all just about the fact that you do something that's a common interest.
Yeah. It's funny, I used to know someone that had a disabled child, and she decided to buy a motorcycle and sidecar so she could take her out with her. And that, excellent. So, yeah, it is a great leveler. And I think for me, it can be stressful sometimes with disputes. And when you're an adjudicator or an arbitrator, the short thing is everyone hates you. So the person that's bringing the claim, the person that's defending it, normally nobody actually normally wins 100%. They can normally find something to complain about in your decision or award. And most of them during the process will write you nasty letters to try and persuade you one way or the other. So you can have all sorts of things said about you. You can have all things thrown at you. And at the end of the day, you've done your job. You feel good about it. And you know that they both hate you. So just to get out on your motorbike where you're on your own, riding around, it's just a great de-stressor, I find.
That's a brilliant de-stressing tip for anyone out there who's not yet riding motorbikes and in need to de-stress. I've got a question. Before we started recording, you mentioned that at the start of the year you weren't talking about diversity and inclusion. So I want to ask what changed at the start of the year.
I got asked to give an after-dinner speech at one of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators branches. And they wanted me to talk about diversity and inclusion in dispute resolution. And I have to say, when they asked me to talk about that, I did sort of think, oh, God, do I really need to talk about it? Because I just think, well, it was 2022. Come on, we've got women working in construction contractors and various companies as directors. We've got quite a few construction law firms now that have women heading up the construction law section. And I didn't really feel that personally I'd suffered anyway in this regard. So I was a bit negative. And then a couple of things happened, and it just really made me realise that how I hadn't really been looking. And in my little world, I hadn't noticed it at all. And there were three things, in fact. And the first one was that I'd recently been added to the TEXA, which is the Technology and Construction Solicitors Association panel of adjudicators. So there's a small panel of people that are recognised as properly qualified adjudicators. And I went to a conference, and at that conference, in between speakers, I got chatting to someone, and he just sort of casually mentioned, well, of course, you do realise that there are people in our industry that will never accept a woman adjudicator and that they won't have them for their disputes. And then the next speaker was on, and I didn't get a chance to respond, and I just thought, hang on a minute. And that just really fazed me, because it wasn't you really realise that it was almost like a casual conversation. And I just sort of thought, well, I can't imagine at a professional event having a casual conversation where someone said, well, of course, so-and-so won't accept a black adjudicator, so-and-so won't accept a Jewish adjudicator, so-and-so won't accept a disabled adjudicator. So why is it a casual conversation that somebody will accept that it's all right to discriminate against women? It just couldn't understand where this was coming from. And I've since heard from other people that there are similar views that they won't accept women adjudicators. And I did a little bit of research as well and asked questions. And at the event, there was about 15% of the people at the event who, when I asked if your client said that they didn't want a woman adjudicator, would you do your best to make sure you didn't get one? About 15% of the people there put their hands up and said yes. So you've got people, and this raises a whole load of questions. Now, I'm not saying that to sort of decry those people, but it seems to me that this still seems to be something that, it's still okay to discriminate if that's what your client wants. And that for me is quite telling. So that was the first thing that got me on this diversity inclusion path. The second thing was I heard an interview. It was actually Law in Action, and they were talking to the Bar Standards Board. What they'd done was look at women's pay and men's pay for barristers. Now, the barristers that deal with construction and building disputes, they would fall under the term financial and commercial barristers. And what they found that for those over 15 years of call, so pretty experienced barristers, the women were earning less than half than the men. And to be fair to the Bar Standards Board, they're looking into this now, and they've got a committee to try and look at this. But that was pretty shocking to me, less than 50%. And apparently there was no obvious reason, because obviously they would have mentioned that in the report, but I found that pretty shocking. And then the third thing that got my goat, if you like, was hearing about, there was a barrister, I won't mention his name because I don't want to give him publicity, but his name's Mr. K for our purposes. And he was involved with the dispute. His opposite number was a woman barrister, and they were having a meeting. And during that meeting, he basically said to her that women are emotional, unreasonable, and hysterical, and that the profession had gone downhill since more women were called to the bar. And you just think, and to cut a long story short, he obviously she put a complaint in. He went to to an investigation. And even then, he carried on. He actually said to them, well, if you don't agree with me, I want to bring in an expert witness as a psychoanalysis to prove that is actually true. And unsurprisingly, he lost. But, when you hear this, and the fact that when you go to his chamber's website, he's actually down as one of his areas of expertise is discrimination law, you just think, oh, there we go. So that's three things. So that's somebody refusing to have a woman as a dispute resolver. We've got pay levels, and we've got people still think it's perfectly okay to just stand there and say, well, of course, women are emotional, unreasonable, and hysterical. And in fact, if he's probably listening now, he's probably think I'm being all three now. But that's where we are. So that's why I really sort of started to get interested in the question of diversity and inclusion. And in fact, I'm actually running a workshop on that at this year's Adjudication Society conference in November in Edinburgh. It's a quick plug there if anyone's interested in finding out more about adjudication.
It's mind blowing, isn't it? I mean, it is absolute mind blowing. I mean, I hear it a lot on construction sites. Women, you always rely on emotions, and it's like, well, no, actually, that's just human, guys. I'm sorry. Men do emotional too, and I think I'm finding a lot in the construction industry now with the mates in mind side of things that men who are suppressing their emotional response are becoming quite ill, and mentally they're really struggling. And actually, if everybody just accepted that emotion was normal human behavior, and yeah, I'm not talking about bursting into tears every time somebody turns around to you and says, I disagree with your level survey. Although obviously they'd be completely wrong if they were disagreeing with my level surveys. But it is totally normal to be passionate. I mean, I'm passionate about the industry I'm in. I'm passionate about what I do. I'm passionate about inclusion, not just female inclusion, but all inclusion. And yeah, I mean, hell, I talk about it in a way that is emotional because it means something to me, and engineering means something to me. And I fell into engineering in a way similar to you. I didn't start out planning to be an engineer, but it just kind of happened. But that doesn't mean that I'm not passionate about it. And I think that the more passion we have within the industry, and the more diversity we have, the better it is. And that whether that's arbitration, I mean, I think there'd be less arbitration if, going to be controversial. I love being controversial. There'd be less arbitration if there were more balanced boards making decisions about how contracts were resolved. If you had half your board as female, half your board as male, the decisions that were made would be different and they'd be better. I mean, going to arbitration for a year for a business decision stinks of ego, and that's something that you don't get as much of. Harvard Business School did a study into diversity, and they found that 87% of decisions were better decisions if the panel making that decision were diverse. They were better business decisions, and I think the construction industry could learn a lot from that. But yeah, I mean,
No. Yeah, I mean, it's true. I think it's one of the problems that I have is I think there are some people that are quite willing to say, I accept we need more diversity and inclusion, and I'm open to it, and I'll work on it. But in reality, they don't see what they're doing. And I'll give an example of, I have to be careful what I say here, but of an organisation where they were looking at appointing some new people to this organisation. And the first question that somebody asked was, well, who do we know? And the problem with that is that you are then narrowing your pool of potential new people to the people that you know. And we all like sticking with people that have something in common with us. We all do. It's natural. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you are looking at opportunities and inclusion and future work, you need to get those diverse views in, and simply saying, oh, who do we know that could talk about X, Y, and Z? Again, you're just narrowing your pool to your own part. You're not opening up to people. So I've also involved with, as I say, with the Institution of Civil Engineers. And what I like there is that when we need someone new for a panel there, the question then is, well, where can we go to advertise this and make sure that we're getting a vast pool of people that we can call in? That's their go-to. It's not who do we know. It's, okay, let's make sure this is advertised, that all the members get to see this and get a chance, rather than just starting with a narrow pool. And I think that's the thing. It's sometimes we don't see how we ourselves are not being diverse and inclusive. And that includes me as well. But that's part of the problem. So there are people that want to embrace diversity and inclusion, but don't really see how it affects them. And then there are people that simply won't have it. And I've been at meetings where I've pointed out that the decision about having someone on this particular grouping seems to omit the fact that the people that live in the area are not reflected in the people that run this organisation. And maybe we should try and encourage some of the more local people involved to join. And had some really shocking responses to that suggestion that, well, what's the point, that they're not interested and things like that. And it's like, well, have you actually asked them? And so there is this problem that, as I say, I think myself I've been a bit naive about, because I meet people that talk about diversity and inclusion. And I think, oh, great, the world's great, lots of people doing this. But there are still a lot of people to whom, unfortunately, those sort of words are not things they want to hear about.
And we're so glad to have you on board the bus that's making noise in 2022, which is exactly why we're here. Because we realize that although we're fully clued up, there's so many more people who we need to talk to, who we need to keep making noise about.
The other thing is that it actually makes good business sense. I mean, as you say, you talked about the Harvard Review. I mean, the fact is that a more diverse board and management is more profitable. There's been research on this that you can prove it. And, that's the thing. It actually makes you more money as a business. And let alone the other commercial opportunities, because companies now are being asked to show, particularly if you're doing work for local authorities, that you are more inclusive. So if you're just being narrow-minded and saying, well, it's nothing to do with me, Gov, I just employ the best people, but you're not, because you're just looking at a narrow pool, then you're going to lose out financially. So it makes sense on that balance as well.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm going to ask you one final question before we wrap up, and it's a question we ask every single guest on the podcast. And that is, what change would you like to see in the construction industry in the next 5 years?
What I would like to see is engineers being seen in a more positive light by the general public. Because what I see is on television, for example, it just glorifies property developers and architects, homes under the hammer, grand designs. It's all, oh, this is marvellous and we've designed this and that and the other. And you only really see builders and engineers when things go wrong, so you see problems about, oh, this poor little old lady spent 80,000 by somebody that knocked on her door and has demolished her house and it's falling apart, and those sort of new build homes that are falling apart. We're seen in the negative light. And the other thing is that, like engineers, the sort of programs that they're on, they're all worthy documentaries. And they're seen on what I call the dad channels. So, the channels where it's documentaries about building the pyramids, World War II programs and car shows, those sort of channels. That's where engineers are seen. And we don't see them on the mainstream. And we don't see them in stories. And I was thinking about this when I was watching Money Heist on Netflix. Brilliant show if you want to watch it. I think it's great. But the main character there is this really intelligent man called the Professor. And he plans everything out. He does all calculations and all the engineering plans and things like that. He's the main hero. So I think what we need is something like that, where the hero's a female engineer and riding a motorbike. I think that'll be the best thing for me.
I absolutely love that. I think we've found our main star of the show already.
Oh, this has been so much fun. I've loved this one. Oh, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been great to speak to you both. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Engineering Rebuilt. We hope you enjoyed being part of the conversation. Please join us next time to hear more diverse stories from people who are reclaiming their narrative to rebuild engineering.